Hi and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is a programme where you can have your property related questions answered by a team of experts. And joining me today is Zee Razaq, Managing Director of Certax Accounting Limited based in St Albans. Welcome, Zee.
Hi Stephen, thank you.
Good to have you back. And joining Zee is Noah Laguda, founder of Noahsure Real Estate, located here in Canary Wharf.
Hi Stephen.
Good. So no travel expenses.
No
today.
travel expenses at all.
Okay.
No emissions.
Okay. Well, let's get right on with the questioning. And Noah, you're going to go first.
All
right. Quite a complex question here. Okay. As a seller of a rental house, how am I supposed to know if an agent is overvaluing my property just to get the instruction? Your panel have said that an agent must manage expectations of buyers and sellers, but as I see it, the agent has raised expectations to get the instruction, then spent the last time lowering my expectations. I think we've had that before somewhere, haven't we? Would I have been better off just using a well-known online agent who gave a valuation in line with average selling prices in the area? My house is still for sale 1 month after instructing the agent, with only one offer 10% below the asking price. I mean, this is a question that we have asked in many different ways on Property Question Time, Noah. And I know that you don't run what I would call a conventional agency. You're an international property expert, and your spread across the industry is great.
That's correct.
So I'd be quite interested to get your perspective on this, because actually it's down to agency morals, isn't it?
It is indeed. And although obviously we do run our own private office, we do definitely cater to the needs of the local community and obviously national as well. So we do get obviously a lot of inquiries in regards to free property valuations. And what I have found, and what we have found, is that there are a lot of bloated figures that are definitely put out there to win the instruction. So that is correct, and it's something that I think is, like you rightly said, morally wrong in that sense, because you're giving a false sense of what isn't achievable. And then what all that will lead to is, price reduction after price reduction after price reduction. Don't get me wrong. I mean, every property in its own sense can be valued based on the authenticity of it, in terms of any work that's been done to it in comparison to the next property, alongside it. So the value of that might be a bit higher than the one next to it, just because they've put a bit more into it. But I think in regards to an online only valuation, I wouldn't just, lean only and solely towards that, because I think when an agent actually comes out to the property to have a look at what's actually going on in there, yes, of course, bringing comparable reports and, but to do a proper appraisal, I believe there needs to be, visual, visual kind of reflection of that property. You need to see it. You need to understand it. You need to, check out the proper space and know what sort of condition it's in. Rather than just, jabbing some numbers in the computer and there you go, that's what your house is valued at. You got to give it a little bit more detail than that, and it comes with skill, it comes with expertise, but it also comes with really understanding the market, really understanding the area, really understanding, the comparables properly. It can be quite a difficult thing valuing a property, and it's important that it's got right. So I think, yes, one should be very wary of the estate agents that want to give out bloated figures that are not in line with the market. But at the same time, you also don't want to lose that, as I said, personal touch, of someone coming in to have a proper appraisal, because I think that's very important.
Look, I've been selling property one way or another. It seems like 100 years now. It seems like forever.
It's only 50.
And some of the skills of the negotiators today are just not there. If I had a negotiator around or a valuer around to tell me what my property was worth to go on the market, I would expect him to know what's gone on in my street, in my area, or in my building.
Yes.
There are lots of online portals now where you can get this information
quite easily.
You can go directly to land registry. So actually, it's very easy to check whether the information you're being given is right or not.
Correct.
But again, you're right, there's lots of aspects to it, and a personal visit is important because, I mean, the state of some properties that people are expecting to sell, I mean, you think, well, I just, what are you hoping for? Because, you know, somebody buying your property is buying a dream.
Yes,
and so you've got to present that dream, haven't you? You know, you've got to make it right. I mean, I know from the agency point of view, one of the contra arguments to this would be if you work for one of the more, shall we say, aggressive London agencies, they will say, well, we will pretty well say anything to get the instruction, because without the instruction, we ain't never going to sell it. Now, if that means adjusting the instruction 2 or 3 weeks down the line when they've not been successful, they will just take that as a part of the course and do it. But I don't think morally it's a very good idea.
It's not.
And I think we live in a world where information is so easily obtainable. You know, what do you think, Zee?
I think you made some really good points, and I think we were talking off air about credibility. I think that's so key, because if you keep on getting orders or deals like this, people will soon realise when you have a bad reputation, you won't get repeat business. Because I'm sure in your industry, repeat business is so important, and same in mine as well. And that valuation is so important as well. People don't realise, and now I'm going to bring in the old accounting hat in, but from an accounting perspective, you have to get your properties valued or have the valuation to update the accounts. And if people are constantly doing it wrong, it's not going to look good on your financials. So it really depends on what you're doing and what you're buying it for. I think you mentioned dreams. That's probably a different market to an investment market.
Sure.
So it's depending on what person's doing, and get people like yourself involved.
But even then, Zee, you know, a buy-to-let landlord wants to feel proud of the property that he's buying. And secondly, he will also know, if he's a good landlord, that the better landlord you are and the better product you present, the better tenant you're going to get 9 times out of 10. I think that's going to do it. I mean, I see these agencies being very aggressive and doing these things to get instructions, but as I say, I think there's so many ports of call now you can make to verify this information. I just don't think I don't think you should be misled. And as for the point that he says, I've only had one offer 10% below the asking price, well, just say no. You know, you're only going to lose money if you sell it.
Indeed.
I think you made a really good point. It's about how to add value. And by you doing it online, from my view, just like being online, people doing accounts and tax, it doesn't work, because someone's got to go and look and see what the value is and then articulate that value. I guess that's where you differentiate yourself, right?
I think the other thing is, you know, we're all human beings. We all get emotive about our properties because they're so personal and they're so valuable. And I suppose the real thing is that the valuer that comes along and doesn't tell you what you want to hear is at a sort of disadvantage before he starts. But, you know, you've just got to be big enough and bold enough to be able to say, well, I just do wonder what's right.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, right, well, we'll move on. And Zee, your question. I have a rental terraced house in the city centre up for sale at 300k. That I've owned for 20 years. I understand that if I sell, there'll be around 40k capital gains tax to pay. The house is empty and the rental market is strong. And the house is reasonably up to date with new smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors, etc. Having next to no money at the moment, would I be better off maximising the rent and taking out a loan, or should I sell up and go paragliding in South America? Please advise. Well, I don't know if you're going to be able to help him on the last point there, but perhaps you'll have a go at the capital gains.
I like that question. You'd be surprised how many people we get who are making decisions without understanding the full information, and that's why you should have a consultation with someone who knows, and to go through the scenario, what your long-term goals are, right? If your long-term goals is to go and live in somewhere exotic, you're still going to need money. Sure. And therefore rent is a good way of getting that money to be able to pay for all that. Indeed. I think the option's got to be, if you've got no money to pay the capital gains tax, which can be minimised currently in the UK, if you own it in your own name, it's 18 or 28% for residential property. So you can minimise it through number of different strategies. But my number one option would be keep it, refinance and pull the money out. and then you don't pay no tax. And you still got the property provided it cash flows, and you've got enough obviously liquidity in the company, in the property. I think the other thing is if someone's actually lived there, we've got to think about all these implications, because this minimises your capital gains tax.
Yeah, well, he does say it's empty, doesn't he? But you know, I think this refers back to a point you made in an earlier show, Zee, really, that one of your experts should be a good mortgage broker.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, a broker will look at this situation and say, well, look, I've got a number of companies which maybe lend you enough to give you equity to take out, or to leverage, I think is the expression, is it not? You know, so I think there are a lot of options, but it's going to take professional help, isn't it? Accountancy, brokerage.
I think it needs property, someone who understands property, right? Because it's, for me, I know we talk about accountancy tax and different aspects, but you need someone who understands what the person's achieving. Because if you, for example, refinanced it, and one of the reasons why you want to sell it was, say, income tax, which we haven't spoke about. If you're married, if you do it smartly, you can space that over 2 people. And therefore you've minimized your income tax and you're still getting your income. And it's these kind of things you've got to look at. And what I was mentioning, if someone actually has lived it as their main residence, if they do then sell it, they can take advantage of that, because that reduces your capital gains tax. Have they spent money on refurbishing it? Can also reduce it. Have they let it out in their time and lived there? Therefore they can get something called letting relief. It did change. It used to be a lot more attractive before. So there's loads of things that they can take advantage depending on what they want to do. But my number one would be refinance it, keep it, don't sell unless you have to, provided it cash flows.
Anything to add now?
I think you hit it on the money there. That's, I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break, and we'll be asking more of Noah and Zee to impart their expertise on your questions. Hi, I'm Stephen Galpin, and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time with Noah Laguda and Zee Razaq. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you.
Noah, your first question of the second half. I'm a landlord concerned about zero deposit schemes that an agent is using to advertise my house for rent. Is the panel aware of the zero deposit schemes that estate agents use and get commissions from? I understand that it costs the tenant around 1 week's rent to set up and make them eligible for the scheme, but they do not get this deposit back at any time. In return, the tenant does not need to find a full deposit to move into the property. Won't such schemes attract longer-term affordability issues with prospective tenants, causing them problems, and the landlords too? If they can't afford to pay a deposit, isn't there more chance of rent arrears in the future? What risks or benefits do the panel see in such zero deposit schemes? I mean, this is a fairly new phenomenon, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed.
I suppose in some ways it's useful for the cost of living crisis if it helps get people into property, but...
I was going to say that I believe maybe because of the cost of living, the cost of renting, you know, going up quite high, you know, than it's ever been, really, to be fair. There needs to be sort of new ways to accommodate, you know, anybody and everybody who wants to rent, you know, from... You know, the 18-year-old who wants to live the parents' house to now go and rent his own place, to the uni student, to a graduate who's got the first job, whatever it is, you know, there needs to be different sort of ways to accommodate, you know, those individuals and those families that may not necessarily have, you know, 3 months rent, you know, sitting in the bank as a deposit, or even 2 months rent. So then there needs to be other sort of ways in how to do that. Of course, all the necessarily credibility checks still need to be done in terms of the credit report and, you know, referencing and all that kind of stuff to make sure that you identify the type of, individual or family that's renting that particular home. But I do feel there can be some flexibility in regards to the deposit. I do feel there can be some, you know, maneuver there. So if this 0% deposit, you know, scheme is an option that could help certain families rent properties, who need it urgently, then it's something that I potentially could advocate. And, I'm
not sure of the logistics of it. Is it an insurance company that's guaranteeing that missing factor? Do they? I mean, when you put a deposit down to rent about, the idea is that when you come to the end, the landlord checks round, and if there's any serious dilapidations, they take it from the deposit.
Yeah.
In these schemes, is that insured in any way?
Yeah, there must be some sort of backup, because they've obviously paid a week's rent or whatever to, have access to the service. So there must be something to back up, the landlord against such things as you're saying. There must be. I mean, I don't think,
I know you don't deal directly with...
I don't really deal directly
with rentals, but I mean, you must have a lot of your investment clients ask these kind of questions.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
And I suppose it would fall on you as the guiding light, if you like, to put them with agencies that do proper schemes.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I would always put my clients with, the proper schemes and the proper deposits, and but if it's a new sort of scheme that's innovative and it's there to help, especially during the times that we're in, I wouldn't knock it straight away. I don't know about you, Zee.
I think I'm probably going to be not that popular on this one. I see it from the other side, because a lot of our clients are landlords and they've been getting absolutely killed from all these different angles. There's a balance and it has to be met. If someone's not getting a deposit and there's no way of them having some compensation for damage to their property or rents not being paid, then is it fair that they should be taking that baggage? And I think that's the balance that's got to be had. Have they got enough protection in place? And I think that's where I worry when we say 0%.
Well, it's almost self-defeating, isn't it? Because if you do the checks on somebody and they check out as being financially sound and reliable, then finding the deposit shouldn't really be a problem, should it?
I agree with you, and I think this is where we just get the balance. And if the government feel there is people falling through the cracks, which this can happen, then I feel the government should step in.
I agree with
because
that.
I think they should then have a pot that can protect the landlord. Because if the landlord cannot have rent arrears and not pay, because then they go out of business, and that affects us even more in the future, because there's not enough property available. It's just left derelict, and that's what's been happening.
Yeah.
Well, I think the negativity on it is this, really. You have the government who puts a cap on the amount of deposit that is going to be needed. So you can't charge, I think, is it more than 5 weeks deposit now?
Correct,
currently?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to let people go in without deposits, no security for the landlord, that landlord may well have a mortgage that is probably not far off the rental income that he's receiving. It's a bit unfair to leave them so vulnerable. And I just do wonder whether it is, as you were sort of indicating, going to cause a shortage of property.
I do agree with what you're saying in that regard, and of course there does need to be that protection for the landlord, and I'm sure that there is a way within that scheme that there must be some form of protection for the landlord. I don't think it would be as vulnerable as that, would it?
Well, I don't know. You see, the government are now starting to say, aren't they, we want no fault evictions. So in other words, you're going to be more secure in the property you're renting, but you can't allow somebody to be more secure if you're then going to free up the possibility of them going into huge rent arrears and with the landlord unable to do anything about it. Yeah. I mean, if somebody is in a no deposit situation, they suddenly don't pay their rent, that landlord needs to be able to say, okay, buddy, well, we've obviously come to the end of our arrangement. You can't pay. I don't want to give you the property, so off you go. Yeah. And if the government are going to stop that, then we've got a great difficulty.
I think you raised a huge point, and I was going to mention that as well. There's no fault, and not being able to do that, and combining with this, it's making it not attractive to be a landlord.
No.
Right? Because you're not because they're not making huge margins. And I think this is the area that really annoys me when I see the other side. A lot of these guys are investing, or ladies are investing in this for their future, and they're not making huge amounts of money. Scrupulous landlords, they're making, if they're lucky, as you said, just covering their costs, and they're getting that asset for time when their mortgages lower?
I think this government is forgetting what an important role the private landlord has in our housing availability programme.
Indeed.
And I mean, I've mentioned this time and time again on our programme. If you go back to the days of Thatcher, she brought in the assured short-hold tenancies, which was the first time a landlord could actually get his property back. So an assured short-hold means you're assured of a fixed term in the property, and the landlord's assured that at the end of that term he can have it back if he wants it.
Yes.
And if we go away from that, we're going to go back to the old days when you're stuck with tenants who don't pay, don't do this, don't do that. And
we wouldn't want that.
see huge problems. Anyway, there we are. Zee, your final question of the programme. Are there any taxation implications in converting commercial properties to residential? I'd very much like to hear the pros and cons of such developments. Now, I know that's a one-line question, but I've got a feeling your answer is going to be more than one line, isn't it?
One of my favourite areas, and I know we talk about commercial property, and I think that is a very complicated question in the sense there's so many different variables, but I'll try to summarise at a high level, and I probably won't cover all the stuff because I would be here longer than our viewing.
You've got 2 minutes.
Thank you for that. So I think the pros, it's huge pros when you do commercial resi. There's stamp duty, land tax benefits potentially if you're buying it for that purpose. There's VAT potentially if it's been opted to tax. Also, it depends on whether you're a property developer or property investor. I'm taking it from a perspective that we're a property developer. If we're doing it purely to buy it and then sell it on, the VAT is lower. It's as a conversion, it's from 20% to 5%, which can be quite beneficial. And also,
is that on the costs of doing it?
Yes, on the cost of converting it. But when you buy it, the stamp duty, land tax is always done on the gross, right? So if you get some clever planning, there's a few different ways to elect not to have to pay the additional VAT, and therefore not the stamp duty, land tax on the VAT. So there's a lot of benefits on when you acquire it and when you actually do the work. And only the disadvantage is if you're selling it, you can't benefit from capital allowances because it's your developer, you're trading. It's only if you're an investor. The flip side, the con side is when people decide to change their mind of what they're doing, and this causes a lot of problems because if you start renting it and you don't become an investor, not a developer, you have something called a VAT clawback because you can't charge on normal residential rental property. It's exempt for VAT, so you've got to think about that. And I think the other big area is, have you actually really understood the benefit? Have you realised it? And what I mean by this is, if it's I'm assuming a complete residential conversion, because you can have mix where the commercial and the residential aspects, is that you've got different issues now. Because if you are going to sell it as stock, fantastic, you can sell that off, great. But if you become an investor, you've got a whole problem of structuring. So there's a lot of pros and cons depending on what you're doing. The other bit we've also forgotten is financing. Got to understand the financing because you may be changing your terms. You likely are, and is that allowed? So it depends on how you acquired it and how you're getting the money to develop it. So it's really important to have those conversations at the beginning. And also, I guess, make sure the legal agreements, if you're going to do leases or however you're going to do it, are in the correct manner. Because they're all linked. The tax, accounting, the financing, the legal. These are 3 common areas that you've got to have someone who's got oversight that can say, look, there's a problem here, you need to speak to this specialist and get that. So I know I've covered a bit.
Well, I think if I condense your advice, it's a good thing to do, but for heaven's sake, get your professional advice before you start.
And I think having really good power team, and I think this is the conversation we've had on the panel, having people that can help you different, because no one, and I'll stand here, no one knows everything. And if they say they do, they're lying. It's simple as that. So you need to have a good team around you.
Okay. Well, on that note, that's all we've got time for today. So a huge thank you to Zee Razaq, Managing Director of Certax Accounting, and to Noah Laguda, founder of Noahsure Real Estate. Thank you both so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Great show, great
for
questions, great answers.
Yes.
Look forward to seeing you next time on Property Question Time.